The Planners. This happened during a road trip when I was 17. My friend and I had been planning on driving to the beach together and spending the week there. But at the last minute, I found out he had already gone, and so I had to follow. But he felt guilty, and so he booked a motel for me online so I can stop there in the 12 hours drive it took to get to the beach. And I couldn't believe the place I saw. The motel was broken down and looked like it was actually someone's house. The only sign that it was a motel was painted on the side of the house right above the window, Rachel's Hotel, except they misspelled Rachel, putting the H before the C, and there was no second A. Impressively, it actually looked worse inside. It smelled of cigarettes and something else that I'm sure was acidic. I was surprised to see that they had a counter of sorts, but I wasn't surprised at the lady's attitude at all. I asked if this was Rachel's motel, hoping that I was wrong, but she asked me could I read, and said the sign was right outside. She asked me if I'd finally come for the rats, and I told her no, I was here for a bed. That made her sit up. She asked my name, and when I told her, she smiled and welcomed me. She led me to my room at the far back of the house and told me that I could sleep there. I don't remember what it was, but I'd forgotten something in the car. And so at some point in the night, I was heading to my car. That's when I heard it, loud cackling. The woman was speaking on the phone, and she kept saying that he is here, and he just smells like money. This concerned me, but I was beyond concerned when she said, and bring the pistol too. I hurried to my room, where luckily I hadn't unpacked anything yet. I took my bag and I opened the window and jumped out. I ran around the back, and when I was in the clear, I bolted as far away from the place as I could. I could have taken my car, but I worried then that I was leaving, so I mostly sat on the stone bench outside and waited for the sun to come up. As soon as I could make out the buildings, I started towards my car, and when I arrived there, I was horrified. The wheels had all been slashed, and I looked at the building and saw on the window, there she was, and behind her was a very tall man. I called the cops and told them what happened, but I decided to not press charges since I was leaving that town anyway, and I'd never have to see those animals again. The Wanderer. There's a certain motel I used to frequent back in my college days. My parents would have never let me take a girl back to their house, and so I had to either sneak them in or take them to the hotels and stuff. And I decided to use the motel. I'm not going to lie, it wasn't Birmingham Palace. It didn't always smell good, and there were times when I could hear bugs in the room. Also, the secretary was one of the creepiest humans I've ever met. She would always stare at me when she thought I wasn't looking, and she would breathe through her mouth often with this glazed over look in her eyes. But hey, what else could I do? Well, the last time I went there, it was a bit of a warm night, so I was feeling rather woozy and in a mood for sleep. But I had to go because I wanted to clean up my room before I took the girl I was going to take there. I cleaned a bit before I got rather tired and decided to take a small nap. I got on the bed and fell asleep, and that's when I heard the bugs again, just wheezing. I woke up and saw that it was dark night outside, and in the darkness I saw a small red dot. I thought I was still dreaming, but after a second I realized I was awake. I got up and walked over to it. It was a cushion pillow, but when I pressed it, I started to feel something solid and cube-like inside. I ripped it open, and there was the eye of a camera staring right back at me. It was only seconds later that the door opened and the light streamed into the room. It was blocked by the bloated body of the secretary. She looked at me, her face unchanging, but I could tell she'd been running from how she was breathing. And that was the creepiest moment of my life. And ever since then, I've never gone to any motels. The Yella. I stopped by a motel when I was going to the Super Bowl. There was still a way to drive, and so I was in somewhat of a cheery mood. I really enjoy road trips, and luckily I was going to get one. When I arrived there, it was fully booked, and I was very lucky to get one room, which improved my mood some more. This mood was destroyed by a single man. I was trying my door when I heard footsteps next to me. Slow, methodical footsteps, as if the person was counting in their head. I turned my head to it, and there I saw a guy dressed in a long black coat. His nails were chapped, and I noticed that for some reason his skin was bloated. But really, it was his eyes. His eyes were black, quiet, and dead. It was almost as if he would shoot you and not blink. Feeling slightly nervous, I tried to open the door harder, but it wouldn't budge. I turned and saw the man had turned to his own door and he was opening it. That's when I guess I started to realize I could have overreacted, so I called to him. But again, when he turned to me, he moved at a snail's pace. I tried to force a smile, but after about 5 seconds, I realized the man was not going to stop staring at me blankly. So I opened the door and I walked into my room and wished the floor would open up and swallow me. I got to my bed and fell asleep, but then as I was sleeping, I couldn't stop coughing. I thought that was strange, since I couldn't feel any tightness on my throat. But that's when I realized I wasn't the one who was coughing. I opened my eyes. It was about 3 hours later, seeing the clock next to me, and at the foot of my bed, there stood the man. The sides of his lips turned upwards, and his small, many teeth appeared. And he asked me, "Why?" I yelled and asked how the hell he got in. But when his smile fell, I realized I was in over my head. I ran out of the bed and out to the corridors. I reported the man, and he was hauled out of the room and thrown out of the hotel. But that doesn't mean I could get a relaxing sleep afterwards. The Residencer. Okay, if you want to know why you should never go to motels, here is one story for you. I was having complications with my residence at college, and so for the week I couldn't sleep in the campus. So I had my mother lend me some money so I could sleep out of the motel for the week. A terrible idea. I drove to the motel and I stopped outside. It was big, with massive glowing red lights. So far so good. But when I opened the door, I immediately smelled the place. Like smell. It was truly intense, and as I walked closer, I saw that there was a man standing by the road. He was yelling at the top of his lungs and shoving somebody out of my sight. As I walked closer to the door, I could see who he was yelling at. It was a street light. The man was fighting, pushing, and spitting at a street light. And then he turned his attention to me. I looked to the front immediately and walked inside the shop, trying not to look back. It truly made my heart slam when he looked at me. I got my room from the lady and I went to my room. The bed was soft, I will admit, and I fell asleep almost immediately. But then as I was sleeping, I heard loud banging on my door. Then there was some incoherent screaming in a language I don't think exists. The man was just yelling pointlessly. I called the receptionist, and she told me that he does this at times, and she asked I bear with it, promising me no harm will befall me. And because I have no spine, I said okay. I sat there the whole night, listening to the man hit my door, before I was finally allowed out. I didn't come for a second day, and you shouldn't go for the first. The Changers. My mother and I stopped at a motel when we were driving to my father. It was a pretty fine looking place, nothing special, but what made me pause was that there was a gang of young men just standing at the door and smoking there. The minute my mother stepped out of the car, all of their heads swung and looked at us. Somehow, she didn't react to them. She just walked on as if nothing had happened. I walked with her, and together we walked past the men standing there, silently watching us. While at the receptionist, we ordered our room, and then we grabbed our bags, leaving all those we didn't need. It was when we got to the gate that one of the men stopped us and asked to assist us. I would have said no, but he'd already taken the bag from my hand. To be honest, he wasn't like anything I'd expected. He smiled easily and said a lot of smart jokes. Apparently, he'd gone to college and at pretty great places because he sounded very smart. But behind his smooth talking were some tricks I didn't see. He finally asked me if he shouldn't get my dad's bags, and I told him that my dad wasn't there. It was just my mom and I. I knew the minute I'd said it that I'd messed up. My mother's head snapped at me, and there was a small twitch in the man's eyes. But he quickly hid it and smiled politely. He continued the conversation, but honestly, I wasn't in it anymore. He placed our bags in front of our door and called out our door number to himself, and then he left. As soon as he was gone, my mother bent down and picked up the bags. She told me that was not very smart. I shouldn't have told him that. We snuck out of the back of the hotel, passing through where the workers worked, and then we walked through the forest. I was very scared. We got into the car and my mother drove off. By the time we reached the road, I looked to the mirror. The guys came running to stand at the streets and they watched. Then they smacked their hands in frustration, and oddly enough, that was the most frightening piece of it. I have no idea what those guys were planning to do, but they were not happy they didn't get to do it, and that was terrifying to me. The Explorer. I only ever sleep in one hotel when I'm out, and never any other. But there was only one time that I slept at a different hotel. It was a motel, to be exact. The first and last time I'd ever used a motel. I walked all the way to the place, and when I was inside, I was only met with a cold secretary. She didn't seem at all happy about the money I was bringing to her pockets, and I had half the mind to leave, but I knew I couldn't walk another step. I had to sleep. I yanked the keys to my room from her hand. She actually looked a bit surprised, but I didn't care. I walked the hell out of there and headed to my door. It was cold inside, but the bed sheets were warm. So warm, I only closed my eyes for a second, and I didn't even have the strength to take off my shoes. That's when I heard a sound in my room. It was a soft sound, followed by another similar sound. I heard it a third time, and I was sure that it wasn't just a dream. I looked around, and it was coming from the door. The door was rattling, twisting and turning, almost as if somebody was trying to open it. But no, that couldn't be right. I knew I had to be delusional. Then I heard a sliding sound, and the small yellow key slot turned black. Somebody definitely slid a key into the spot. So no, it was not a dream. It was absolutely real. Someone was trying to open my door. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got up on my feet and waited as the person tried the door over and over again. But no matter how frustrated they got and how they rattled the key, it just wouldn't open. So I slowly sat down, realizing I was safe. I threw the blankets over me, and then there was a click sound. The guy who walked in almost touched the top of the door. He stared at me for a moment, And then he smiled, and he walked out, leaving the door wide open. So I put on my shoes, and I left that place, never to return there again. The Detector. Oh yeah. I went to a motel once, when I was around 12. I went with my mom, dad, Steven, and Andrew too. I don't remember where we were going, but I do remember it was around Christmas, so maybe we were going back home. I don't know. But anyway, we arrived at this crappy looking building, which they called the motel. And when we went inside, we met this lady there. I don't even know what she was, because the receptionist was right there. So who was this lady? I don't know. But she was there, and as we were asking for rooms, the lady kept piping in and giving her own opinion for some reason. My dad asked for 2 rooms, and the lady said there was only 1 room here. We should try another motel. My dad ignored her and asked for that 1 room, saying we will share. And by share, he meant we were going to be sleeping on the floor while he and mom slept on the bed. The receptionist lady agreed and gave us the keys. Now, as we were walking to our room, the lady kept following us, telling us that there were better motels around and stuff like that. But my dad was not the type to be conversational with, and he asked her to leave. Then, we arrived at our location. There was only 1 bed and carpets on the floor, so my dad gave us the mattress while he took the duvet and left us with the comforter. I was sleeping next to Andrew, and I remember I was trying to ignore his terrible snoring while he had his hand on my face, and then I heard the sound of kissing. Maybe it was the sound of something tearing. It could have been either. It was followed by some hammering, then some tearing and hammering. Finally, I woke up and looked around, expecting to see a bug at least. I didn't expect to see that lady, just crouched at the feet of my father's bed. Her eyes were looking straight at me. I screamed my head off, and everyone woke up. My dad saw the lady standing there like a weirdo, and he yelled, "What the F?" which showed how shocked he was, since he never swears. The lady ran out of the room, and my father chased her, while my mom tried to comfort Steven. Turns out, that lady had left some drugs in the bed, and had only returned for them, and she begged we don't tell the cops. But she did pay for our silence, so my father remained quiet. The Haunted. My best friend once told me that there was a haunted hotel at the town where I was going to, and he asked I promised to never go there. I did. I promised I'd never go there. Problem was, I didn't know which of these hotels it actually was, and so when I was passing by that town, not only had I forgotten the promise, I also couldn't have known which hotel it was that he had asked me not to go to. The hotel seemed a bit homely, to be honest with you. It had a nice, charming air to it, and it was nice and small and comfortable. The receptionist was a kind girl named Sarah. She showed me to my room. I took a couple of pictures around and posted them on Insta and Snap. Then I got ready for sleep. Let me tell you, I've never fallen asleep so fast in my life as the time my head touched my pillow. I was awake one moment, and the next thing I knew, I was floating in space. In my floating, I heard somebody giggle. Then a massive green gust blew into the air from all directions, twirling around me. I then felt it then slammed me in my center, right on the chest, and I opened my eyes to find I was still in that room. But I could still feel the cold wind, and when I looked up, I saw it. At the side of my bed, there was a woman. She was wearing a maid's uniform, and her face smiled, but she was pale, and I think there was dried blood on her lips and neck. I don't know. I didn't have the chance to make sure because I jumped out of bed and ran to the doors, slamming into the corridors. I went to Sarah and called her to my room, and when we got there, there was nobody inside. I promised her there'd been someone inside, and she said it was fine, and I got the sinking feeling that she believed me. On my way out the next morning, I saw a picture on the wall, and I kid you not, it was the exact same woman I saw from the night before. Sarah told me that the woman was the person who they bought the house from. She now lives with her 3-year-old son and her husband elsewhere. Her grandmother was murdered in this house when she was young, and her grandmother, it was said, used to look exactly like her. Sarah stared into my eyes as she said that, and my chest tightened. I know I can't prove it, but I am entirely convinced something supernatural happened there that day. The Stalker. I knew a guy whose family owned a motel. One time, I had to pass by their location, and I asked him to let me sleep over, and the guy agreed. But when I got there that day, he didn't seem too happy to see me there. His mother was the one who sent the email apparently, and he hadn't known I was coming. It was extremely awkward by then, and I realized I shouldn't have come without warning. He and I hadn't been the greatest of friends anyway, so I should have warned him at least. A real dick move, the one I pulled. But what else could I do now? I was taken to the room, and I sat in the bed for most of it, trying not to make too much noise so he could feel like I wasn't there. I must have fallen asleep at some point from staying so still. But I do remember waking up at some point and seeing someone standing over me, though I'd assumed that was a dream. The following morning I woke up and took a shower, then tried to leave as soon as I could. It was so early it was dark out, but I wanted to leave as soon as possible. But as I was packing my things in the car, I realized that I'd lost my bracelet. I went back inside to look for it, and I happened to open the wardrobe, and I couldn't believe what I saw inside. It was pictures of a girl, and when I looked closely, I realized that these were pictures of me. They covered the top, the bottom, the back, and the sides. My bracelet was on the floor, on a pile of other bracelets and sweatshirts, a shirt, a few socks and bags. These were all my things. The things I lost back when I was still going to school with the guy. Something wrong? I whirled around, and at the door, still in the dark, the dude stood with an empty look in his eye. My throat was so tight, but I managed to pinch out a, "No, I'm alright. I just wanted to go pee." He hummed, and then he said, "Well, breakfast will be ready." I told him I'd be there. He stood there for a long time and looked to the wardrobe, then back at me. Finally, he turned and he left. I followed after him and snuck out the door, and when I was outside, I ran away as fast as I could. The Shrugger. We went out on a boys' trip once, and we'd made it to a hotel. There was only one lady there, and when we fell asleep, we heard a loud screech erupt. We woke up and considered calling the cops, but then the scream immediately died down. The following morning, as we were about to leave, we found the receptionist lady was still there. We told her about the sound, and the warmth in her eyes disappeared. She told us to leave now that we are done, and so we left with a shrug. It was the strangest experience in my life.